Welcome back. So in the previous lesson, we went over how to write to a text file, and in this lesson, we will look at how to read from a text file. So writing and reading from a text file, whilst there are some similarities, but they are two different things, right? They require different steps. They are just different in and of themselves, even though you are writing and reading from the exact same file. But, going about doing both of those things require their own individual processes and steps. So you're going to find that if you are reading from a file, there's a bit more steps to it because that's where a lot of the processing happens, right? If you are reading from a text file, and say for example you're reading from a text file that has the student ID, it has the student name, and then it also has the student age, right? So then you're gonna have to maybe store each and every one of those elements within a particular string. That would require more from you as a programmer than if you had to just say write down a bunch of stuff to a text file. That's pretty simple. You just write down a bunch of stuff. It just kind of reminds me of back in primary school when say for example if you are misbehaving in class, and the educators would be like, I need you to write 100 lines saying that you will not misbehave in class. So then you would take a piece of paper and then you'd start writing, I will not misbehave in class, right? And so doing that was quite tedious and monotonous, but you just did it. It didn't require you to think, it didn't require you to do anything. And that's the thing about writing to a text file, is that it's quite simple. If you know your steps, it's quite simple. But reading from a text file requires a lot more understanding and a lot more attention than if, say, you had to write to a text file. So what we are then going to be doing is we're then going to be using the input file stream, right? We're then going to be using the input file stream. Input file stream file, right? So in the previous lesson, we used the output file stream, and now we're using the input file stream. So then once we've used that, we are then going to have to say file dot open our file dot txt, right? Let's just do this, right? Our file dot txt, and then we are going to have our conditional statement, which is if file dot is open. If that is true, right? If that is true, then I want you to do this. I want you to basically do a while loop, while get line file, comma. So we need to declare a string which will store, or which will store the information that we've just read from our text file. So let's come down here. So once you've gotten that, and so now we can start basically displaying all of the contents of this line, right? And so let's just do it like that. So let's just come down here and let's just have an else, right? Just have an else, and we're going to be couting file not opened, right? So that's what we're going to be doing. File not open. That's the error message we are going to be throwing if this file is not yet open, right? So let me just put the indentation correctly. Yeah, so just put that down there. Okay, so this is our program. I forgot to close file dot, sorry, not clear, but file dot close, right? So I forgot to close the file. So file dot close. Okay, so we have file dot open our file, right? So we know that in the previous lesson we created a file called our file, right? So now we are just sort of bringing it back in, and we now want to read all of the contents that are in our file. So for those of you guys who might have a hard time remembering what was in the previous file, there is no problem. We'll just go back here and we will basically open our file. There we go. Let's open our file. So we just had hello, hello, hello world, right? That's all we had in our file. And so now what we're saying is file.open our file. And so we're saying if file is open, right? So we went over that. So if the file indeed is opened, I want you to do this. Now this while loop. So what we want to do is everything that is in the text file, we want to store that within one variable. So everything that is in the text file, our file, everything including the the hello world and also the next line, hello world, excuse me, we need to put that into a variable so that you can then display the contents that are within that variable, right? So with computers, it's not as simple as to say you are just reading. If you are reading something, you have to read it from something. So that thing that we're going to be using to read or to connect basically the file towards our console application is a variable where we will take the the contents of our text file, we're going to store it into our variable, and then we're going to use the variable and then display the variable in our console application, and that is how we are then going to be able to read the contents of a text file using our own program. So the while get line, the get line, I'm pretty much sure that we are familiar with the get line. We used the get line if we wanted to say display a string that contains a space, right? So for example, if you wanted to output your name and surname to the console application, you would then use the getLine function. But here we are now using the getLine function. We're saying while getLine file, this our file, comma line. So this getLine function in this context, it holds two arguments, right? So if you guys can cast your mind back to when we were just still doing the basic programming, where we would have something like this. We would say get line, maybe say it was stdcn, and then down here you would then say have whatever you wanted to put in, like let's just say user underscore input, if that is the variable that we had. So before we would do this is how we used the getLine function, right? So we used the getLine function to essentially have a string that is going to have separate strings to it, or strings that have spaces to it. So we have two arguments. We have the cin argument or the input argument, and then we have the variable. It's the exact same architecture as this one, where we have the file input and then we have the line variable. So whatever is stored within the line, that is going to then be stored within the line variable, right? So even with this cin, we know the cin from this. So if we wanted to get the user input, we would then say user underscore input, right? So this user underscore input would then be our variable. So we would say stdcn user input. So then whatever the user input is going to be, it's going to then be stored in this user input variable. And so that is what we're saying. We're saying that the user input, the cin, which allows us to get the user input, I want you to then make it, or I want you to store it in this user input variable. So that is just, me just reminding you of the getLine function, right? So we have the file, and then we have this line. So we are telling the computer that whatever is in this file, I want you to put that into the line variable. And then, we then now are trying to display the line variable to our console application. And then we just close the file. And then we said else for this if statement. We said else if the file is not open, then I want you to then output file not opened. Now, I want you guys to see what's going to happen if I run this application. File not opened, right? Why was the file not opened, right? We said that we need to open the our file, right? But why is the our file not opening, right? Another thing that I want you guys to also notice is that I mentioned earlier on about the when we were doing the writing to a text file, I mentioned that when we have the output stream, this output file stream, the output file stream is that if we figured out, or if the computer came down here and figured out that there is no our file, text file, if it doesn't exist, then we need to create one. But what's happening here is that with the input file stream, it knows that my job is to only read. I am not writing. So if I come down here and it just says file.open and I realize that there is no our file, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to, just not do anything, right? Because the file that you are trying to open does not exist, which is why I said to you guys that you need to have this if statement so that you know, or you don't waste your time writing down code when the entire program is not even when you can't even find the file that you are trying to open. So this allows you to have some more insight on what is happening with your program, because if you did not have this if statement and you tried to compile your program, and you're thinking to yourself, why the hell is it not doing this? Why is it not outputting this the contents of my text file? Well, it's because it did not find the file that you were looking for. So in this case, we are saying to the computer, if you do not open the file, or if the file is not opened, meaning that you did not find the file, then I want you to then output file not opened. But why is the file not opened? Because if we go to our file explorer and we open the file, right, this guy, and we open our file, there we go, our file, right? It is spelled exactly the same, our file. The thing is, you need to be extremely precise. You need to say .txt. You need to specify what type or how is it saved as. What type is it saved as? It's saved as a .txt file. Your computer does not know that it's saved as a .txt file. Your file explorer might know that yes, this actually is a .txt file, right? It's not the same thing that we're looking at. It knows that our file is a .txt file, but your computer does not know that, right? C++ does not know that. So you need to tell C++ that in my file explorer, you need to look for our file that is of the type .txt. So now if we run this application, it then displays hello world, hello world, hello world, and hello world, and hello world. So that is how to essentially just write to or not to write, but to read from a text file. But what I now want to do is I just want to do this, right? I want to do this. I don't just want to give you guys the stuff that is way too basic, and when you come to the exam they give you some things that end up throwing you off your game. Excuse me, I want us to do this. Let me go to the file explorer. So I created a text file called new file, right? So this is what it stores. So what this new file stores, it's the user ID, it's the name, and then it's the age of the student or the user. So the user ID is 5, the name is John, and then the age is 23. So how do we go about storing these values or these things individually? Because we know that this is an integer, we know that this is a string, and then we also know that this is an integer. So if we had to sort of store these individual elements into variables, what type of variables, or what's the data type of the variables would we need in order for us to store these different information types, right? So let's just go down here. So we have a new file, right? Let's just go back to our main file. Let's let's just do fstream file, fstream file. But what I now want to do is I want to go up here. I want to get a string, and then we're going to call that name, right? I then want to come down here and say integer id, and then I come here and then say age, right? So once I've done that, I will then say if file, okay, before we do the if file, still need to open the file. So file.open, I think it's new file.txt, right? So new file.txt, and then now we're going to check if is file open. If is file is indeed open, then we want to essentially just close the file, right? File dot close, right? That's what we want to do if the file. Okay, I'm not too sure about what's happening there, but if the file is open, this is what we want to do. So we will have a while loop, right? So now this is where everything kind of differs. So we will have a while loop, and then we'll have file, we will have id, we will have name, and then we will have, I think, age, if I'm not mistaken. And then once that has then happened, we now want to see out the not see out, I think, yeah, let's just see out the id, right? And then let's do this, and then let's see out the name, and then let's do this, and then let's see out the age, right? And then let's just have a new line, right? Let's just have a new line attached to it. And so file dot close, now it's working. And so when we come down here and say else see out file not opened, sorry, file not opened, right? So let's just run this. We have basically everything that we had in our new file.txt. So let me explain what's happening there, right? So we've created a string called name, right? A variable called name. We've created an integer id and age, and then we have our basic processes, right? So we've opened this new file.txt. So now what's happening here is if the file is opened, while file, right, id, name, age. If you look at these brackets, and I don't know if I can call them brackets or whatever, but if you look at this operator is reminiscent of this, the cin operator, right? If we had to do cin, right, user underscore input, it is reminiscent of the cin operator. So what does it do? Well, the cin operator, it allows us to get the user input, and it allows us to store that user input into a variable. But in our case, we don't have user input. Our user input is whatever is going to be within the text file. Whatever the contents of the text file is, that is going to be our user input. We're going to treat it as a user input. So we are now saying whilst file, which is the thing that we will be using to get information from, we are then saying the first line or the first element within that file should be stored in the id, in the integer id variable. And then the second thing that we're going to find or the second, when the cursor moves to the second point, that whatever it's going to find there, it should store under the name variable. And then when it moves on to the third point, or the cursor moves to the third line, this is what it should store, whatever it finds. It should store it in the age variable. And that is exactly what happens, right? So then now I'm basically just outputting all of this, right? So I understand if this is a bit of an information overload because, you know, I did say that reading from a text file requires a lot more steps and processing and all that stuff. But, once you just continue doing it, you're going to realize that it's just basically simple, right? But, we are going to be exploring how to sort of store values in a text file in an array, because what you've just learned here allows you to actually do that, right? So yeah, that's going to be it for our lesson.